While the campaigning began last week, the provincial election technically started today, because today was the day the Lieutenant Governor, David Onley, drew up the official writs. Greg Lyle is keeping a close eye on the race. He is the owner of the Innovative Research Group, and we welcome him back to TVO. Nice to see you again.
Nice to be here.
You've got some lovely, colorful charts here.
Indeed.
Hot off the presses. And let's start, if we could, Greg, with page 6, because when we want to consider who sort of has the wind in their sails, admittedly at the early going, this tells the story.
Sure. In fact, this one is really more of an anchor than anything else. So when news comes, news goes. Sometimes it's good for you, sometimes it's bad. But where do people start? When they wake up in the morning before they see anything. And what that slide is showing is political brand loyalty. What party do people feel that they're closest to?
And the largest number feels like Liberals when they get up in the morning.
28%. And when you realize the battle between the Liberals and the Tories, there's only 21% of the province that wakes up and feels Tory. So the Liberals start on an average day 7 points ahead of the Tories.
And
they
lots
start
ahead of the NDP.
16 points ahead of the NDP. There's not that many people that identify with the NDP as a party.
Now, the rest of the numbers here suggest that there actually aren't that many people who get up in the morning and consider themselves free agents. Is that right?
Well, there's a certain 16% more than them feel they're New Democrat, don't feel that any of them work for them.
Okay.
And many of those people won't vote at all. And then there's another 11% that just don't know, and they're fairly disengaged, so they don't know that much. So when we have the situation we have in Canada today, where in a typical election, 50 to 60% show up to vote, the people that are most likely to vote are the people that feel close to an existing party, so that exaggerates the advantage that the Liberals have in terms of party ID.
Okay, let me take you to page 16 here, and for those who believe it's time for a change, right? Government's got to go. What did you find?
Well, what we found overall is that if you agree strongly, if you're passionate about it, then 55% are voting Tory, only 21% NDP. The story there is that people that are likely to be NDP supporters, so people that want to redistribute wealth, people that don't really trust a profit motive, people that say that spending should be based on need and not on ability to pay, those people are pretty happy with what Kathleen Wynne's been doing. And so they're not as likely to strongly believe that there's a need for change. And if there's no passion, there's no action.
Let's go to the page before, because we hear this all the time, that maybe it's time for a change, but I'm a little nervous about what Tim Hudak represents. What did you find there?
Right. And what we find is more than half of Ontarians today are nervous about Tim Hudak. They're afraid of what he might do if he wins. And the issue there is if you strongly believe that you're afraid of what Tim Hudak and the PCs might do if they're in power, then you're overwhelmingly likely to vote Liberal and not NDP. If you just back off from strongly agree to somewhat agree, the gap dramatically narrows between the NDP and the Liberals. But to the degree that the NDP takes shots at Hudak and actually get people scared about him, they're going to help the Liberals win. It's a real challenge for them.
E-health, Orange, gas plants, scrubbed hard drives with, erasing emails, all of this business. For some people, that has made them so infuriated they will never vote Liberal again. How many of those people are there out there?
Well, there's less than 40%. And those people, the ones that are most mad, they tend to be Tory. They tend to be conservative in their values, and they are spitting mad, which is very good for the Tories, because even though they don't have that big a pool to work with, their pool is really angry at the Liberals and isn't very likely to go there, and their values don't connect with the NDP. So they have what we call a GOTV, a get out the vote message, in the anger people have over these issues. But on the left is just nowhere near as angry about these issues as the right is. And I can't tell you why, they just aren't.
So for those who say the Ontario Liberals may have their problems, but they're still the best party to form government, is there enough of that out there for them to win?
Well, it's not as good as they'd like it to be. It's at 35% right now. They'd like it to be over 40. But the point there is that there are lots of people that don't think they deserve re-election who would not vote for them in a by-election, who when they think that the government's at stake, will hold their nose and vote for them, right? 10-second Liberals.
10-second Liberals. This one's always interesting because we've always been under the impression, we're talking about the leaders now, that Tim Hudak was the least popular leader. Kathleen Wynne was, reasonably well liked, but that Andrea Horwath was sort of the most popular leader by far. Your numbers tell a very different story. You want to take us through those?
Sure. Well, it's not that Hudak is well liked.
No, he's at minus 22.
Right, he's got almost double as many people that dislike him as like him in this online poll that we're talking about there. But for him, he's actually got more people that like him that are voting Tory. So he's not holding the Tories back. He's actually doing better than the Tory-based support.
He's running ahead of the party?
He is running. In terms of if you stop 100 people on the street, you will find more people that tell you that they like Hudak than say that they're going to vote for the Tories today.
Huh, okay.
So if you take often what people will do is take the undecided out and compare what they call decided vote and decided views on the leader. But that's a bit misleading because that doesn't explain what happens when you stop people on the street. So he is not a barrier to them at this point in time. Now, there's going to be probably $2 million of working family ads that's going to be added to this.
We should just explain. That's the coalition of labor groups that certainly in the last campaign, dumped $2 million into destroying his reputation before the writs were even drawn up.
Right, and we've already seen an ad from them prior to this campaign going after Hudak. So he's going to have more pressure on him, but at the moment it's not a huge barrier. The really interesting thing, though, on leadership is Wynn's favorables and Horvath's favorables. And what we're seeing is more people like Wynn than like Horvath. It's just that in the past, fewer people have disliked Horvath, so she's had a stronger net positive image. She's picked up some negatives lately, very likely because of what she did on the budget. And if you look at who's best to serve as premier, if we look at that according to value groups, we see that the premier is doing much better than Horvath among a group we call core labor, which are people that say we should redistribute wealth, they don't trust a profit motive, and they see that spending should be based on need, not on ability to pay. They're almost 50% saying that Kathleen Wynne is the best premier.
Let me follow up on that, because I did a piece for our website not too long ago on, quote unquote, the two elections that Kathleen Wynne has to win. She has to establish herself as the champion of the center-left first, so kind of an election against the NDP, and then she's got to go out and beat the Conservatives to be the government. In that first election, that warm-up election, who's the champion of the center-left? Liberal or NDP doing? How's it going?
This week it's going to the Liberals, right? The left liked the budget, right? A majority of people on the left liked the budget. They were not happy, especially in the core left, with the decision of the opposition to force an election. They didn't want to see that. They wanted their pension. They wanted the pay increases to people on the front lines. But it's only the first week. Right? And one of the things that I find interesting about the campaign is the decision of the Liberals to go for a longer writ than they really needed to do.
Meaning normally 30, 31, 32 days,
right.
This time 41.
Exactly. And that creates opportunity for things to happen you didn't plan for.
Like what?
Well, imagine that an envelope comes out about a contract that someone close to the premier got, or something comes out about some expense spending that she did.
Or the former premier's chief of staff gets arrested by the OPP.
Well, if that actually happened, it'd be pretty surprising. I mean, normally the police do not do moves like that in the middle of an election
Remember
campaign.
when the RCMP dropped the news that Ralph Goodale?
2006.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does happen, but it's a rare thing. The real story is that the scandals that involve the former premier, some guy named McGuinty apparently, but you wouldn't hear that from the Liberals.
She said it yesterday.
Oh, did she?
She said it for the first time yesterday.
But the issues that deal with them are not sticking to her. And so what the NDP need to do right now is they need to find some things that will stick to her. And they need to do it pretty fast.
The NDP, up until recently, had pretty good polling numbers. They were in the high 20s for several months going in a row, which gave the impression, certainly, that this was an anybody-can-win election. What do your more recent numbers tell us about whether this is a 2- or 3-horse race?
Well, it's still anyone's to win. There's a huge amount of volatility. What you see when you look at our political battleground side is a third of the public is not aligned with either of the three main parties, and lots of the public are in swing groups moving between the parties. So the NDP actually have more potential votes when you look at the battleground side than the Tories have. But the Liberals have the most. And right now, with the things the Liberals have been doing as government, the lead up to their budget and the budget itself, this was music to the ears of the center-left, and it's rallied them. They have pulled them their way. They've not had a lot of bad news happening to them. But now it's a fair game. Now you are covering what each of those parties do. Before the election, the government is a bully pulpit because what they do is actual policy, and what anyone else says they would do is just a promise. But in the writ, they're all on the same playing field, and the opportunity for the Liberals to lose some of the momentum they build up is there, but they haven't. They've started out on the right foot from their perspective.
So if you were, I think I've asked you this before, if you were managing one of the three, and let's say Greens too, if you're managing one of the four campaigns and you wanted to win, at this stage, whose campaign do you want to be managing?
I'd be wanting to manage the Liberals. The issues that I thought the NDP was the most interesting opportunity before the election, but they did not effectively drive a sense in the center left that the Wynne government is saying one thing and doing another, that they are not delivering the sort of change that the center left wanted. The question period, you remember the young girl that had the problem trying to get access to drugs, right? There are 1,000 stories like that across this province. Public sector unions identify those through the grievance process. If the NDP had found a way to plug into those grievances to get this intelligence system feeding them with stories like her everyday in question period, where the premier was forced to defend the indefensible on issues of concern to the center left, it would have been a different game. But now we're in the writ. And so the opportunity to do that has faded. And if you look at the situation now, if nothing dramatic happens, the Liberals are going to win. They may not win majority, but they're going to win the way things are today.
You feel very confident saying that?
Yes, but the issue is that it's very fragile, right? Kathleen Wynne is right now mostly promise, not deliverables. Right? She hasn't done very much. She's just said she's going to do things people hope she will do. And so if people can bring the Brown Envelope Brigade to bear and find things she's actually done that people don't like, right, then the opportunity for that lead to evaporate is huge.
Well, it might not even take that. Let's remember that Tim Hudak and Andrea Horwath participated in a leaders' debate in the 2011 election.
Right.
Kathleen Wynne never has. So there could be one of those moments in the leaders' debate.
Sure,
That's enough to do it.
On the other hand, Kathleen Wynne's never done a campaign tour before, and so far her tour looks better than the other two leaders.
Fair enough. Is there anything in your numbers today, and I ask this because turnout last time was 49%, right? Just terrible. Anything today that shows that voters are either more or less engaged and therefore turnout may be higher or lower?
Right now I would say there's a bit more passion, both on the right in terms of anger against the government and on the left in terms of fear of what the Tories might do. And if that anger and fear quotient increases, then we'll likely get more turnout. Unfortunately, it's not a lot about hopes and dreams.
Let me ask you about the pulling of the plug that the NDP did to basically precipitate this election. Presumably they're polling. Presumably they have access to this information. Presumably they knew that the budget was basically received by their center-left voters as being a good budget, appealing to their supporters. In which case, why pull the plug?
Politics is personal, right? You've written about that time and time again. And the issue is that whatever the numbers say, whatever an outside strategist might say, inside the caucus room, there's a lot of people that are tired of having to go out and defend a government that's been in place for 11 years and doing things they don't really want to defend. And I think they just wore out of patience. I think they said, you know, we have done all the rationales we are going to do to explain why we're supporting this government. We don't believe them. We don't think they're really going to do this. And we believe over 40 days we can convince people we're right.
But if you're the NDP, presumably, again, I keep saying presumably because I don't know, but you'd want to go into a campaign higher than 23%.
Yes.
So they are clearly further behind than you would want to be if at the end of the day you want to win.
Well, especially because I felt that there was a huge opportunity for them to make better use of question period than they were by reaching out to the public sector unions, by reaching out to the interest groups and getting them to feed them human interest cases that are simply indefensible, that are illustrative of things against the promise that Kathleen Wynne is presenting. And they didn't do that. And so without doing that, then they haven't created the opportunity. The other thing is that they seem to believe something that the public doesn't believe, at least not the center left. So they seem to think that the public is concerned about getting another Bob Rae government. And there's a part of the government, the public that's concerned, very concerned, but they're conservatives. Right? So stopping another Bob Rae government is a great thing to get conservatives to show up at the polls. But the center left doesn't care about that. I mean, the last time they checked, Bob Rae was a liberal.
Right. And his government got elected almost 25 years ago. So, I mean, at some point, the statute of limitation.
Yeah. Well, not for Conservatives.
Not for Conservatives, but for others maybe runs out. We got a couple minutes left. Let me touch on one more thing. Momentum. The NDP won a lot of upset by-elections in Windsor, in Niagara Falls, in London, in Kitchener-Waterloo. Does that count for nothing going into a general election campaign?
Well, there's a marginal impact on it in the sense that they now have incumbents defending those seats, and that changes the dynamic. And so that may help them in terms of a handful of places. But in the broader picture, what happens in a by-election is in a by-election, generally speaking, you vote on whether you think the government deserves to be reelected or not. It's a referendum on the government. But by the time the election ends, it's a choice between the lesser of evils, right? Which government what party do we think is best able to form the government? So if you look at what happened in BC, right? People started out mad at the BC Liberals, but they ended up afraid of the BC NDP. If you look at what happened in Alberta, they started out mad at the Alberta PCs. They ended up afraid of the Wild Rose. And so that's the sort of dynamic that goes in here, but it's not a good dynamic for a third party. Very hard to cut your way into that.
Fascinating. Greg, thank you very much for these numbers, hot off the press as they are.
Thank you.
That's Greg Lyle from the Innovative Research Group.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.